Okay. Welcome, one and all, to yet another episode of The Vibes Are Off with Whick and Tali. It's a bi-weekly episode we do where we've got on interesting guests to talk about interesting topics and hopefully have an interesting conversation. Uh, Today's guest, I'm going to let Tali introduce and kind of set the stage here. But I see you guys in chat. I see you, Y Does. I see you, KO Dave. Welcome to the show. Yeah, sit back, relax, and enjoy. And if you have questions during it, feel free to super chat, and we will try to get to those. Okay, Tali, take it away.
Okay, cool. So I am going to set the stage for our conversation today, and then I will give our guest a minute or so to introduce himself properly. But the topic of conversation today is Amanda Knox and her famous trial in Italy. This is something that I think maybe people of my generation, the later millennials and on, kind of first heard about from her Netflix documentary that came out in 2016 that was arguing for her innocence. And this was after her uh, conviction had been overturned in the case and she was free and back in America. Since then, she had several famous interviews on the Joe Rogan Experience. She had a pretty successful podcast, and just a week or so ago, her and Monica Lewinsky produced a mini series, a dramatic reenactment of the Amanda Knox story. So there's a lot of talk going on about her story and people sort of revisiting it, but the only person that I saw revisiting it with a critical lens and arguing that actually Amanda Knox is probably guilty, seems to be implicated in this crime somehow, whether she was the one, who committed the act of murder against her roommate or not. It seems that she actually was probably guilty. And the person who made that thread was Dylan Esper, who joins us here today. Something I thought that was fascinating about your thread, Dylan, was that it had about the same number of likes as it had bookmarks. So I think that speaks to the amount of people who are like kind of curious about this, but don't want to sign on to going against, this woman. Um, and a lot of people really angry in the replies, even angry in the replies when we announced this show. So hopefully it'll be an interesting, if not controversial, conversation. So Dylan, why don't you introduce yourself? Let us know who you are, what your expertise is, and what brought you to your interest in the Amanda Knox trial.
Sure. I'm Dylan Esper. I'm a lawyer of 30 years of experience, a civil litigator. Most of my work has been in media, entertainment, a lot of appeals. I've been in some very famous cases. I did most of the appellate briefing and most of the legal briefing in the Hulk Hogan versus Gawker case that was very famous. I represented Kathy McKee when she took her case to the U.S. Supreme Court on fighting Bill Cosby, who had sexually assaulted her. I represented the ACLU in the California Supreme Court when they challenged a law that made it impossible for criminal defendants, including, ironically, Amanda Knox, to sell their stories. I have a wide background, but it's a civil litigation background. I'm a little bit of a true crime buff. The way I tend to approach true crime, it's not an area that I've spent a lot of my practice in. I really only worked on criminal cases back when I was at the ACLU, and then some cases that touched on the First Amendment. But I'm interested in criminal cases because they're interesting, and what I tend to do is I'll pick up a case and just read everything about one case. And there's a few cases I've done that with. I've done that with O.J. Simpson. I've done that with Menendez. I've done that with Jodi Arias, Casey Anthony, and Amanda Knox. So Amanda Knox. Ever since I read up on the case, I found her to be a fascinating figure.
Can we just explain to the audience who might not know, right? Like if they've been running under a rock. Can you just give us a quick rundown of the accusation and what happened, just very briefly, just so we're all on the same page?
Sure. So Amanda Knox was a exchange student from, I believe, Seattle, um, who summered in Perugia, Italy, which is a place where a lot of wealthy kids go to spend the summer vacation while, meeting Italian people and doing a little bit of schoolwork. And in 2007, she was rooming with three other students, two Italians and an English student, all females, in a cottage in Perugia, Italy. And one morning, her roommate, Meredith Kircher, the British student, was found brutally stabbed, locked in her own room of the cottage, and dead. And police conducted an investigation and eventually charged three people with the murder. One was a drifter from, I believe, the Ivory Coast named Rudy Goudet. The second was Amanda's boyfriend, who had been her boyfriend for about a week, Raffaella Sollecito from Italy. And the third was Amanda Knox herself. All three of them were at one point in time convicted of murder by the Italian courts. Amanda and Raffaella later got their convictions reversed by the Italian Supreme Court, which threw out various DNA evidence and then found that the rest of the evidence didn't convict her of reasonable doubt, beyond reasonable doubt of murder. She is, however, still a felon under Italian law because she was convicted of falsely accusing her boss, a black man named Patrick Lumumba, who I believe was of Congolese descent, of murder. And he spent 2 weeks in Italian jail until his alibi checked out because she had falsely accused him of murder. So she's still considered guilty of that, and they gave her time served, which was about 4 years in Italian prison for that.
And so you think...
Yes.
Oh, go ahead, please, Tali.
So I was going to say, so my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is basically Raphael and Amanda were tried together. And so all of their convictions and overturnings have happened together, and they've been, I guess, found guilty, and then it's been overturned twice and twice. Is that right? So this has been reevaluated by several appeals courts in Italy?
That's correct. Their system is quite a bit different in terms of trials and appeals than our system is. And the two relevant differences is, first of all, there's just a lot of appeals. You get a lot of chances to overturn a guilty verdict. And the other difference is that everybody writes. In our system in America, you get tried and convicted by a jury. The jury doesn't write anything. The jury just returns, okay, you're guilty of murder, you're guilty of assault with a deadly weapon, you're guilty of robbery, you're innocent of sexual assault, or whatever they say. And that's all they say. And in Italy, when the trial court convicts you, they write a long opinion and summarize all the evidence and why they convicted you. And then the appeals process is apparently interminable and involves many trips up and down, and those courts write too. So as a result, we have a sort of body of work from the Italian justice system, from different judges who have written about this case and written about how they feel about what the evidence says and doesn't say.
Okay, and so there are a lot of people sort of emotionally invested in this case, maybe see themselves in Amanda, or maybe sympathize with her innocence. And I think something interesting that I noticed in your writing, the thread that you published, and the documentary from 2016, is you make the point that people feel very tied to their narratives. And you take, I think, an interesting position, and I think one that gives you sort of credibility. I'm compelled by what you have to say, so I'll lay my cards on the table. But you are basically arguing like I don't need to know why she did it. Like I'm not impugning a motive. This is just where the evidence leads us, is that she was in the house basically at the time of the murder, and whatever her involvement may have been, And I think when I went in rewatching the documentary, there was a strong media narrative at the time of the case. They were trying to paint a really outlandish motive to her, right? Saying that she was leading some type of sex ritual, and that she had Rudy and her boyfriend there, and they were just trying to give her everything she wanted, and what she wanted was like Meredith's blood. And so I think it's easy to pigeonhole people like you, or the naysayers about this case, as feeding into that type of narrative. So what do you have to say about that?
The first thing is, as with all people, there are always complexities. There are complexities about Amanda Knox, and one of the complexities is that she actually was absolutely a legitimate victim of media sexism at the time of her trial. Everything from just like labeling her Foxy Knoxy. Now, it's true, some of the people who are very into this case will point out she gave herself that nickname. So what? That's slut shaming. It just is slut shaming. And, Amanda Knox, the facts of this case involves a certain amount of sex. She met Raffaele in Italy. She's a 20-year-old American woman, and she does what, thousands of 20-year-old American women have done, young women have done with cute Italians ever since American women started visiting Italy. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. And she got, very much portrayed as a slut. And the prosecutors in the case didn't do themselves any favor, because they speculated about sexual motives and everything. There's a lot of stuff out there where Amanda Knox, rather than being treated as an ordinary murder defendant, was absolutely treated as this sexual animal, basically for having like a normal young woman's sex life. This is, as I said, it is sort of a rich girl's thing to do, to go to Perugia, but it's an every girl's thing to do, to like meet a cute Italian and hook up with them when you're 20, and there's nothing wrong with that, and there's, as far as I can see from everything I've read about the case, there's nothing at all unusual in the totality about Amanda's sex life, but she got that from the media.
Yeah, I can relate, right, with other people seeing you as just a sexual animal and things. This is something I personally have been viewed in by my viewers, right? I get it. I understand. $5 from Audacity to say, as a cute Italian, I feel very seen right now. Thank you for the $5. But I guess the question, right? So given all that, and the media portrayal and the kind of circus, the PR circus that kind of got ginned up about all of this, what about the facts of the case, and just to get to the heart of it, has convinced you that she's guilty? And when you say guilty, you mentioned earlier that you don't know if she's guilty of the actual murder, but you think she's involved somehow. So what facts were presented to you that in your looking over this case, or you're analyzing the case and the evidence, convinced you?
Oh, I tend to use words carefully as a lawyer, and I use the term probably guilty. That's what I think. And here's basically a capsule summary of the facts of the case. So Meredith Kircher's body was found in her room at the cottage. The door was locked, and she was found repeatedly stabbed. And there was semen present. Somebody had apparently had sex with her as well. And she, as I said, the door was locked, and she was found about 14 or so hours after she was killed. She was killed the night before. She was found about noon the next day. And the police were not called because the body was found. So what happened is whoever did this, or one of the participants who did this, took Meredith's cell phones and discarded them on the street. The cell phones were found by the police. The police traced the numbers back. That's what led them to the cottage. To get to the cottage, Amanda is there with Rafaela. Amanda has a mop. The police walk in. The place has obviously been recently cleaned. There's a smell of bleach. There's obvious signs of surfaces that have been wiped clean. There is a Philomena's room, one of the roommates. There's a broken window with covered shutters, a rock, and glass dispersed in a pattern that is inconsistent with there being an actual break-in. The glass is dispersed in a pattern that indicates that the break-in was staged. The black glass is also in the wrong place. There was a pile of clothes next to the window, and the glass isn't where it should be if somebody just threw a rock through the window and climbed in. This window itself is on the second story, and it's hard to get up to from the outside. Sheer wall. There is a window with bars in it, but it's hard to get up to this. And somebody would have had to open the shutters, come back down, throw the rock, go back up. The police immediately, they haven't even discovered the body yet. They almost immediately say it's a staged break-in. This isn't a real break-in. And Amanda and Rafaela are telling them there's been a break-in, but nothing was taken. There's a locked door here, so they don't. How do they know that nothing has been taken? And they ask about the locked door, and they say, "Yeah, that's Meredith's room. She always locks the door. Don't worry about it." They don't worry about it until the two roommates come, and when the roommates get there, they panic when they see the locked door. She never locks her door. This is crazy. Somebody needs to break in there. So they break the door down and find the body. So right from the start, Amanda is lying about it.
Just to get granular in the series of events, the timeline here. From my understanding, Raphael is the one who calls the police, and there's a police recording about that. And then the police arrive. You're saying they have not yet entered Meredith's room, and then the two Italian roommates arrive while the police are there, while Amanda and Raphael are there.
There's a fun fact here. There's two types of police in Italy. There's the communications police, and then there's the police, which are known as the carabinieri, I think.
What are the communications police?
Communications police are like a separate police department that handles just online crimes and crimes involving. Imagine if there was a police force in America that just handled like wire fraud and stuff like that. So because the cell phones were found, the communications device have come. Raphael.
Are they there before Raphael calls the police? Okay.
Yep. Raphael calls 112, the Italian equivalent of 911, from the other room, calls the carabinieri after the communications police have already arrived. I don't include that in my Twitter summary because I actually don't know exactly why Rafaela did that, but he did it, and the police are already there when he calls the police.
Interesting.
And the key point is Amanda has already lied directly to the police about Meredith locking her door, and that, given what they found behind the door, that creates the suspicion that she knew what was behind the door. And she's also lied about, she and Raphael have also, in their estimation, lied about the break-in because they can tell the break-in was staged. And Raphael has said this suspicious thing about nothing being taken when Meredith's door is locked. And, so they wouldn't know if nothing's been taken. And Amanda later on will tell people, Amanda doesn't see the body. She doesn't go in there. But she will later tell people details about the crime that she shouldn't have known. She will tell people that Meredith was sexually assaulted before anyone had announced that there was a sexual assault. She will tell people that Meredith had her throat slit when Amanda never saw the body and never saw where the wounds were. And she will tell people that Meredith screamed once. There's a brief period when she says she was at the scene, and she says Meredith screamed once. Well, there turned out to be witnesses who heard one scream. She knows all this information that she could only know if she witnessed the crime. That becomes part of what the police are concerned about here. And it turns out that Amanda leaves a footprint a shoe print in Meredith's blood in the room where her body was found. Now, how do we know that's Amanda's shoe print? We don't for certain. But it's a size 7 women's athletic shoe, and there's no other woman involved in any way in this case who has a size 7 shoe. So if it's not Amanda's, then it's some accomplice of Rudy, I guess, who got in and got out and left no other evidence at the crime scene, and we don't know about in any other way except for this one shoe print. It's probably Amanda's shoe print.
To be clear, to leave that type of shoe print, the blood needs to be wet.
Of course.
Okay, right.
We're going to get into a couple of footprints here. The blood has to be wet. Rudy left footprints, of course. And
the footprints are left entirely out of the documentary. So they do spend time focusing on a couple pieces of DNA evidence, the ones that were then overturned because of potential mishandling of the police investigation. And they concluded that there was a high likelihood or a high probability of contamination. And so in the documentary, where they have an agenda, obviously, just like, whatever, you have an agenda in theory, right? Because you're bought into a contrary account of this case. But they don't touch at all on the shoe prints. And that is pretty compelling to me, that to leave these type of imprints, you need to be walking through while the blood is wet.
That's right. And Raffaella left his footprint. And this is definitely Raffaella's footprint. It matches Raffaella. The defense tried to argue it was Rudy's, but it doesn't match Rudy's foot, and it matches Raffaella's precisely. He left a footprint in Meredith's blood on the bath mat in the bathroom. So Raffaella was there and stepped in Meredith's blood with his bare foot.
As someone, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I want to say, I don't mind people saying, quote, I have an agenda. But one thing I do try and do here, like you noticed at the very start, I said Amanda has a legitimate beef with the media about slut shaming. Well, I try and say what I know and don't know. Like I mentioned that there's a theory of Amanda's innocence that's consistent with all the evidence. It's just not the one she puts out to the world. And I also mentioned things like we'll get into the knife, but when we get into the knife, Amanda's DNA was found on the handle of the knife. The knife was found in Raphael's apartment. I leave open the possibility that's not a slam dunk on Amanda's guilt, the way it is on Raphaela's guilt. The Meredith's DNA is on the blade, because Amanda was dating Raffaella, and they were spending a lot of time in his apartment. And it's very possible she handled knives, cutlery there. And so I do try and be fair here and say not everything is like slam dunk guilt. I'm not a prosecutor here. I'm just saying what the evidence is. And I think that there's a problem on the other end of this conversation, because the strong advocates for Amanda say things that are demonstrably untrue, and they repeat them over and over again, and they leave no possibility that perhaps the evidence is more nuanced, and that's part of the problem with this conversation.
What are what are some of those things that you hear repeated by Amanda's defenders that you find the most egregious, the ones that are just demonstrably not true, that you hear over and over again? What annoys you most, I guess, that you hear repeated? I'm just curious.
Okay, so with respect to the statement that Amanda made to the police, where she said she was at the murder scene, she heard one scream, and Patrick, this person she slandered, who had nothing to do with the murder, Patrick committed the murder. And she said that, he says, and her defenders say, I was interrogated for 53 hours, and I was tired, and I was denied food, and I was slapped around by the police, and they finally, basically, she doesn't say tortured, but she implies they tortured it out of her. In reality, yes, she had talked a lot to the police over the last few days, but that day, she went down to the police station with Rafaela. They had asked to talk to Rafaela. They hadn't even asked to talk to her. She didn't even have to be there. She went there to support Rafaela. She was going down there to be questioned. What happens is, that's the night when Rafaela burns her alibi. He tells the police, actually, I have no idea where Amanda was the night of the murder. She wasn't with me. By the way, he maintained that claim for the next 4 years after making it that night. He didn't know where Amanda was the night of the murder. So once he says that, of course, with Amanda in the station, sitting in the lobby there, the police say, okay, now we have to go out and talk to Amanda about this. And they talk to Amanda, and within an hour and a half, he makes that statement. No 53 hours. There was no beating. Every court, including courts sympathetic to Amanda, that has heard the beating claim has rejected it. There was no beating. She was questioned an hour and a half. When told that Rafaela burned her alibi, she just folded and said, oh, okay, I give up. I was there. And Patrick Lumumba killed her. That's one of my favorites.
No, that's an interesting one. I'm hopefully Tali, what's up? What's going on with your tech here?
I don't know. You can hear me? I guess
can
my
hear you.
camera has disappeared.
If we have to not use a camera, we have to not use a camera, unfortunately.
Okay.
Do what you need to do. If we can fix it, great. If we can't, it is what it is. Sorry for that interruption. Yep. I guess my question then is, given the evidence that you think alleges, or you allege that this is why I think she's probably guilty, why was the case overturned? Why did the courts decide, hey, we're going to overturn, we're going to rule for her on the appeal? What happened? What pieces of evidence or what argumentation or reasoning did they give that said, nah, we don't trust this ruling, we're going to overturn it?
Okay, so what the court did is there was extensive DNA evidence that we haven't really gotten into. There were 5 blood drops throughout the cottage, different parts of the cottage, that had a mixture of Meredith's and Amanda's DNA in them. There was also a knife that I mentioned that was found in Rafaela's apartment that has Amanda's DNA on the handle, Meredith's on the blade. And finally, there was a bra clasp that was found in the room where the body was found. Detached from the rest of Meredith's bra, it was a part of Meredith's bra and had 4,000 picograms, which is a large amount of Rafaela's DNA on it. And the court threw all of that out on the grounds that the collection and testing methods were unreliable, and thus it could not consider the evidence sufficiently reliable to convict. Without that evidence, the court found that it couldn't find beyond a reasonable doubt that Amanda and Rafaela committed the murders. However, the court also, because all these courts in Italy write, the court also made findings that there were multiple attackers, that Amanda was present at the scene of the murder, and the court did not disturb the lower court's finding that the break-in was staged. And the court affirmed the slander conviction against Amanda.
So kind of what you're saying is kind of she's getting off on I don't want to say a technicality, but the main piece of evidence that was used to convict her, the knife and the blood and all these things, they were not able to consider that anymore because of faulty collection procedures, etc. And so without that, the evidence just wasn't enough. I guess my question for you is Steelman the people for me that disagree with you. Tali, are you still here with us?
I'm here. Yep.
Okay. Can you read some of the tweets that were uh what's the word? Critical of our friend here and their arguments,
Yeah.
and maybe give them a chance to kind of respond to those, please.
So, one along the lines of what we were just talking about the potentially faulty mechanisms of evidence collection. Someone who came out like 13 hours ago criticizing your master thread on this, um, said that this sort of shoddy collection made them conclude that the contamination was likely, if not inevitable in this case, and that this very case, the Amanda Knox and Solicito trial, prompted major reforms among Italian law enforcement agencies for this very reason. So this was, in fact, like a critical moment in the Italian judiciary system where they changed some of their procedures and protocols because of what they saw as such a severe miscarriage of justice in the evidence collection in this case.
Okay, so start from the back. I'm going to mention another case, which was the O.J. Simpson case, which happened in my hometown. And my father actually knew O.J. Simpson. My father was a sportscaster and sports writer who covered USC athletics in the 60s and 70s, and said that O.J. Simpson was the nicest athlete he ever covered in his life. That he was generous to a fault, that he would spend hours after the games ensuring that every reporter got their quote, that he would give people Christmas gifts in the media. He was just an extremely nice man. He also was a double murderer. But O.J. Simpson had a murder case that resulted in his acquittal, that like everybody now agrees he was guilty despite the acquittal. And the crime lab in the O.J. Simpson case was terrible. The LAPD crime lab. And they were picking up samples without gloves. This was on videotape. They were leaving DNA evidence in a hot truck, unair-conditioned truck where it degraded. They were bringing reference samples of evidence to the crime scene where it could contaminate the blood that was already there. They were testing one set of DNA evidence while another set of DNA evidence was up there on the bench. He left a blood sample in the Bronco in a tow yard for a couple of months, where any member of the staff of that towing company could have accessed, and probably did access, the Bronco. People took souvenirs out of the Bronco. They finally sent that sample 2 months after the murders to the FBI for testing. This was a terrible crime lab. After the O.J. Simpson case concluded, the LAPD engaged in a massive reform effort of their crime lab to correct all the deficiencies that the O.J. Simpson defense team, highly paid and one of the best legal teams in history, discovered about the O.J. Simpson, about the LAPD crime lab. That is all true. Nonetheless, O.J. Simpson was guilty as sin, and every one of those pieces of DNA evidence was completely accurate. The two things are orthogonal to each other. They have nothing to do with each other. Yes, it is true that in many cases, and Amanda Knox is one of them, there have been crime labs and forensic technicians at crime scenes that have done stuff they aren't supposed to do. In a perfect world, you want people to change gloves before handling every sample of evidence. In a perfect world, you don't want any one sample of evidence to be out in the lab when another sample of evidence is being tested. In a perfect world, you do not want people stepping in the wrong place in the crime scene or moving evidence. All those things are true. And furthermore, just like we will sometimes exclude a confession in a case that we think is probably reliable, but somebody's Miranda rights were violated, or we will throw a piece of evidence out that we think is totally reliable on the basis of an illegal search, because defendants have constitutional rights, and defendants have constitutional rights in Italy too, and that's important. But that doesn't mean these things have no probative value. There's a massive delta between something having no probative value and being no evidence at all of somebody's guilt, and something being sufficiently reliable that we're going to admit it into a criminal case and imprison them based on it. And what happened here is that the advocates of Amanda Knox are exploiting that delta. They're pretending because this didn't meet the very high threshold necessary for the Italian appellate courts. It met the threshold for the Italian trial courts, by the way, but the Italian appellate court said, no, this doesn't clear the bar of being so reliable that we're willing to use this to send somebody to prison. They're saying because of that, boom, she's innocent. But that's not how things work. You know, there's a whole spectrum of evidence that is totally indicative of a person's guilt may not meet that high bar. And specifically, these contamination defenses in criminal cases are basically BS. The reality is, what defense attorneys do is they say, here, you touch this doorknob, and then you touch this bra clasp. Aha! You must have transferred Raffaella Solicito's DNA from the doorknob to the bra clasp. But one, we don't even know that Solicito's DNA was on the doorknob. Two, we don't know whether it was transferred to the person's hand when they touched the doorknob. Three, we don't know if it did get transferred to the person's hand, whether they transferred it onto the bra clasp. And four, we don't know if they did transfer any DNA onto the bra clasp, whether Raffaella's DNA was already on the bra clasp before the supposed transfer happened. We know none of that. But they conclude, oh, she must be innocent. He must be innocent because a bare hand touched the bra clasp. That's not good reasoning. It's perfectly fine to say we're not going to send a person to prison when the same hand touches the two pieces of evidence. But that's a lot different from saying we have any quantum of proof whatsoever that contamination actually occurred. Contamination is very difficult. And one other thing is that contamination arguments ignore that there's all this other evidence. You have to say that not only the bra clasp was contaminated, but the knife was contaminated, and the 5 mixed DNA drops were also contaminated. You have to say that everything in this case was contaminated except Rudy Gudet's DNA. None of that was contaminated. And further, it was all contaminated in a way that incriminated Amanda. So, there are no blood drops that mix Philomena's blood with Meredith's blood. There's no blood drops that mix Laura, the other roommate's blood, with Meredith's blood. It just happens that all of Meredith's blood drops fell directly on contaminated spots of the carpet or floor where Amanda's DNA was, including 2 blood drops that were found in Philomena's room. We're jumping to ridiculous conclusions here.
Yeah. Well, that part is very compelling to me, and I don't feel like any of your naysayers or the Amanda Knox defenders in general really contend with that. So, again, I'm compelled by what you're saying about contamination, and I think, the more I think about it, it's likely that in nearly every criminal investigation, there is some type of contamination. Humans are prone to error. The more humans you get there doing that. And like you said, I mean, it's really a micro thing. You're supposed to be changing your booties when you're going from one room to another, changing your gloves, every single thing that you touch. And so arguably changing their policies and procedures in the Italian court or in LA, like you were talking about, there's an argument to be made that this is a necessary um, necessary change so that people like OJ and Amanda Knox perhaps and Raphael don't get away with these types of crimes on a technicality, right? That you really need to sharpen up all of your procedures so that you don't muddy the waters, because all you're looking for here is reasonable doubt. And I think that's an important thing, right? And people are really trying to reach from reasonable doubt to total innocence. And again, the thing that I
There's
think people
two
aren't
points
contending
about this.
with, yeah, what
The
people
very
aren't contending with
very few
is,
people make that. Like you
yeah,
when these reforms are being made, they're being made not because we actually think we're sending a bunch of innocent people off to prison. They're being made because we know defense attorneys are going to seize on this stuff, and we're worried about guilty people getting off. So we need to improve the procedures so that defense attorneys have less weapons. And that, I think that's exactly what's
right.
going on with reforms.
Yeah, and again, the critics are not really contending with the facts. So they make the argument that you've, I think, addressed multiple times, which is they make the argument that the reason that Amanda's DNA was found in any of these samples is because Amanda lived there. You know, this was a lived-in apartment. She was regularly going through all of these rooms, and Raphael also was there. He was Amanda's boyfriend of 5 days or so. But you point out that it is only Amanda's DNA that is mixed in with these blood samples of Meredith's. So if these other roommates are also living in this apartment, how did their DNA miss all the exact spots where Meredith's blood was found and only Amanda's DNA mixes in? That's peculiar. Now I'll stick on that for 1 second, and one of the go ahead.
It's more than peculiar. Honestly,
Yeah.
2 points on this. One, just in general, defense lawyers have to argue things because they have paying clients and their job. And by the way, I don't want to make this sound like it's a screed against defense lawyers. That's their job, to test the state's case. And it happens that if you have a client who's got lots of DNA evidence against it, basically the only two things you can argue are contamination and planting. And if you don't think the jury is going to believe that these nice cops over here planted the evidence, and you don't have a Mark Furman tape or something like that to argue they had the motive to, you're left with contamination. That's all. It's the only argument you have, so you make that argument. But the reality is, actually, if you find a single blood drop with mixed DNA in it of suspect and victim, that can send a person to death row in the United States. That's how strong a piece of evidence it is. You are bleeding with the victim at the crime scene, is what that evidence usually means. And if it's corroborated by other things in the case, it basically always means that. And that's the problem here, is that if you actually think about what the evidence is actually showing, rather than viewing it from a lens of there must be some explanation for this, this is the type of thing that convicts people. This is the type of thing that sends people into prison for long periods of time. It's the type of thing that puts people on death row. It's really, it's some of the most compelling evidence you can possibly have in a criminal case. And it's not just, and these people treat it as if, oh, she lived there, and that's the other thing. If they were right about the she lived there thing, it would basically mean that you could never convict a roommate for murder.
Right. Or a husband, yeah,
or a husband or anything, because they'd always be able to say, well, I live there. That's why, my DNA is mixed with my dead wife. And it's like, no, that's honestly, that's exploiting things that people don't understand about DNA. Actually, DNA, first of all, there's differences between the amounts in blood and semen, which are quite concentrated, and the traces that we leave in a place we live in. But also, DNA degrades very quickly on surfaces, which means that the DNA, you have to, if you find a DNA sample after a while, you have had to have left a lot of it, because otherwise it just degrades. And even in the O.J. Simpson case, there were many spots they tested where they weren't able to get enough DNA to actually have a useful test because it had degraded so much. And there is And there's one of the controversies in Amanda Knox case is that there was DNA that had degraded to the point where they could only do a low contact number, which is a kind of DNA test that's a little less accurate. That's because, DNA just doesn't sit there and wait for somebody to drop blood on it and then it's mixed DNA. The other thing about it is what stirs it up. So say you puff off some DNA off your skin into your apartment, and then somebody else later bleeds on top of it. And then the police come and they take a sample of the blood drop. They're not going to get your DNA. Your DNA in that situation is under the blood drop, not in the blood drop. What mixed it? What stirred it up?
So you're saying the DNA has to come after the blood. Is that what you're asserting right now?
When the police say there's 5 blood drops in various parts of an apartment that contain mixed DNA of 2 people, it's not because the person's DNA was already there and the other person bled on top of it. That's not what happened. What happened is 2 people's blood mixed. That's what happened. And you cannot escape that. Again, in other cases, this thing of mixed blood drops is not a new thing. It's not something that only happened in the Amanda Knox case. This is something that happens in many criminal cases, especially stabbing cases. And it's very reliable evidence. Even a single one of these drops is very reliable evidence. But multiple drops is basically conclusive because there's no other way it can happen. And that's true even if you are a roommate.
Okay, so 2 questions that I have for you. So one, again, along the lines of one of your critics, and I'm pulling most of these from the gentleman who posted a large thread in response to you a day or so ago, earlier this morning, perhaps. But basically, he poses the question. So there is the argument made that Amanda, perhaps, and Raphael were scrubbing the apartment and the cottage. You made that argument too, that when the maybe first set of police got there, Amanda was holding a mop, that it smelled like bleach and all of these things. So what the detractors or the Amanda defenders will say is, how is it that they were able to almost perfectly successfully wash away all of their DNA, and yet they left all of Rudy's DNA everywhere? When you can't see DNA and tell it apart with the naked eye, how were they so effectively able to clean up their DNA and leave all of Rudy's?
So the first thing is we know there was a cleanup. Indeed, there was a presumptive blood test that was done in the bathroom, and blood was all over that bathroom. This test turns pink where there has been traces of blood, and there's just like pink all over that bathroom. There was a massive cleanup. You know that. By the way, I don't remember if any Amanda Knox defender contests this, but I don't think that that's a contested fact. I think the general line from people who on the other side of this debate is Rudy did the cleanup. But there's not really any debate that the cleanup occurred.
How does that even square? How does Rudy doing the cleanup even square any of this? Because the people who maintain Amanda's innocence maintain Rudy's innocence.
Well, no. The people who maintain Amanda's innocence think Rudy is guilty. That's the line. That there was one person, there was one killer, and it was Rudy.
Oh, sorry, not Rudy. Sorry. I meant Raphael. Okay, you're saying that Rudy did the cleanup. I see. Okay.
Yeah, the people who defend Amanda said Rudy did it all. He did the break-in. He comes in.
Sole assailant.
He rapes and kills Meredith, and then he does the cleanup. That's their story. And but I don't think anyone disputes a cleanup occurred. And once we understand a cleanup occurred, and it was an incomplete cleanup. We missed things, which is why we find 5 blood drops in different parts of the closet, because that's what would happen when you miss things.
Right.
Is that the ones that are left are all over the place. They miss things.
You're saying it's not as this gentleman portrays, where essentially Amanda and Raphael's DNA was mostly cleaned up and Rudy's was everywhere. You're saying even Rudy's was sort of scattered around. There were just
Well, we
spots
don't
that were
know,
missed.
but as we don't know, you'd need a time machine to go back to that cottage before the cleanup happened to know where all the DNA was that was cleaned up. We don't know what the cleanup protocol was. But I will say, like, two things about this. First of all, it doesn't actually refute the fact that Amanda and Raphael's DNA was there. Okay, so there's this weird issue with what the cleanup was like. So they found Raphael's DNA on her bra clasp. They found 5 drops of Amanda's DNA mixed with Meredith's in the blood draw. They found Amanda's DNA on the handle of the knife with victim's DNA on the blade. That it doesn't refute any of that there was this weird cleanup. But entering the realm of speculation, which I am loath to do in this case because I think way too many people just speculate in all sorts of ways. But in the realm of speculation, is it inconceivable that if the plan was to make Rudy the fall guy for this, that they would clean up areas of the cottage where they knew they left their own DNA, miss some areas, and not clean up areas where they knew that Rudy left a lot of DNA? That's not inconceivable. It's not. I want to make clear. I think there's some merit to this argument. I do think there is something a little improbable about the fact that they seem to have left a lot of DNA from Rudy and maybe not left so much DNA themselves. But it's improbable. It's not impossible. And you could certainly see that if there were 3 murderers and 2 came back to clean up, and they're going to stick it all on the one guy as the fall guy, that they might know where to clean up. They might have where they need to clean up and where they don't need to clean up. That's not impossible. And Amanda and Raphael are smart people who might think of such things. They thought of a lot of other things in this case. It's a favorable argument for the defense, but it's not a devastating argument.
Right. So I have 2 quick. Wick, were you going to say something or
Yeah,
should I continue?
I just want to read a couple super chats out. People paid us money. Might as well read these chats out. $5 from Mr. Wise Guy to say, if a girl wants to normalize being promiscuous and don't come crying to me when people sloth shame her, I thank you for the $5, I guess. And then $5 more from Audacity to say, if there was an American internet police, they'd spend all day over policing the dark net. Thank you for the $5. I will also say there are people who are in chat who are contesting your recounting of events. For example, they're saying that she was never found holding a mop. They say that you're misconstruing that, and they say that you are mixing up the accounts of the smell of bleach from her apartment or her cottage or whatever with Scorielli's, the search of Scorielli's. How would you respond to that?
I think they smell bleach in both places. And what I know is that the cops came and there was extensive evidence of cleaning. She was definitely there with a mop. I believe she testified about the mop. I believe she said that she brought the mop over to Rafaela's because there was spilled water or something like that, and then brought the mop back to the cottage. But, the reason for that testimony was because they found her with a mop. So, yeah, they found her with a mop. And as I said, part of this is, I want to just say something about, the policing here, because the Italian police get a lot of criticism over this case, obviously. But if you actually, instead of taking the narrative you hear in the media, just put yourself in the position of an Italian policeman. What are they doing here? Well, they come to this place, and Amanda does have a mop, and, these surfaces have clearly been cleaned, okay? And at that point in time, they don't make anything of that. They've come to a place where they've traced a missing cell phone, and there's cleaning going on. So what? Then they see the staged break-in and they realize it's a staged break-in. Well, there's something wrong there. Okay? But then the occupant of the cottage, Amanda, says, don't worry about the locked door. Meredith always locks her door. They're not worried about that either. They're just getting into this. What they know is that there's 2 cell phones on the street and that they've come to an apartment where somebody staged a break-in and there's been some cleaning. The important thing is those conclusions all occur before the body is found. And the reason why that's important is because Amanda's defenders will tell you that these were all things made up by the prosecution to frame Amanda.
Post hoc rationalization.
Post hoc. And even using the term post hoc rationalization is a little problematic because this is what lawyers do. This is what my profession does.
Right.
We get the case after it happens, and we try and fit the case into some theory. And sometimes we're right, and sometimes we're dead wrong. And that's my profession. We do this. But things that were concluded on the ground before the prosecutors get involved, it seems to me, have special credibility. And the conclusion that the place was cleaned, as I said, I don't think the Amanda defenders really contested it was cleaned. And the police came to that conclusion before there was a body. And they weren't trying to frame Amanda or anything else. They just noticed the place had been cleaned, which is the sort of thing a good cop will notice when they come to a place in a situation like this.
So one thing that's really just sticking out to me, and maybe I'm making too much of it, because I didn't realize this until this conversation, was that there were 2 sets of police, one that had already arrived to the residence before the published sort of 911 or 112 call that Raphael makes to the police. I'm interested in this because it's left out entirely from the documentary. So in the documentary, they portray it as Amanda gets home from Raphael's apartment after spending the night there. They were watching movies and making out and making love, she says, and they fell asleep and she goes home in the morning. She doesn't apparently see the broken in window or any of this stuff. She kind of goes into her house, sees, like you said, Meredith's door locked, doesn't think anything of it, goes to take a shower, sees a little bit of blood, doesn't think anything of it, but then when she comes out of the shower and notices the unflushed feces in the toilet, she becomes a little freaked out and she calls Raphael. Raphael comes over, and according to Amanda's recollection, she then becomes really concerned about Meredith's door being locked and asks Raphael to break it down. And she says that he attempts twice to break the door down unsuccessfully. And then we hear them play the recording of Raphael calling 911 or 112. So it would make it seem like he gets there, she starts to see all this evidence. He gets there, they try to break the door down, and together, when they're unsuccessful, they call the police. However, now there's a very different story that actually there was already a set of police there kind of looking through the apartment and stuff like that. Raphael goes into a separate room to call the police. Why wouldn't he ask the police on site to bring to call the other department or something, is something that I'm wondering. And it makes me think, and again, I'm narrativizing here, right? But are they starting to get nervous and now they want to proactively call 911 so that they sort of have that on the record, is a speculation that I'm making here.
I will again say I have no idea why Raphael called 112. I just don't know. And I'm trying, in my discussion of this case, I'm trying to separate what I do know, what I think, and what I don't know. And I don't know why Raphael called 112. I can tell you that on the call, he calls twice, actually. First time, he starts to get into the details of, the break-in and all that. And the 112 operator starts cross-examining him, and he hangs up the phone. Then he calls a second time. It's the same operator, and says, there was this break-in, but nothing was taken. And again, remember, at this present time, when he says nothing was taken, there's a locked door of Meredith's room. Well, how does he know nothing is taken? But he says that on the 112 call. But I said the big thing to me is Amanda lying about Meredith locking the door. Because that
Yeah.
blows everything she says about this out of the water. For instance, she can't have been freaking out about the locked door, because if she was freaking out about the locked door, she would have told the communications police that. But instead, she says, don't worry, Meredith always locks her door.
Right.
I mean, that is an absolutely deadly piece of evidence, and it was said in front of witnesses. And,
yeah.
of course, Philomena and Laura then get home, and it's related to them that Amanda said it. And they say, oh, this is terrible. You've got to go in there.
Right.
To be a devil's advocate for a moment, if you'll allow me. In the case of sort of like all this attention, all this kind of, the police are there making calls, all these things, isn't it possible that people would act irrationally and start saying things that might seem contradictory in the moment? I don't know if that's entirely evidence that they're lying, or if they're just scared or nervous or a whole host of reasons, right, other than to cover something up. That it could be that they have made contradictory statements or quote unquote lied or what have you, right? Like, again, I don't know if I find that in and of itself, at least, enough to be like, yeah, she probably did it.
So I think the problem is number of lies.
Oh, just real quick, Tali, reverse your camera. We don't want to see your DMs, okay? Don't expose anything you don't want to. Just letting you know. Anyway,
Working
continue,
on
please.
it.
Problem, the number of lies.
Okay.
If there's just a single false statement or even a couple of false statements, and you've got, a nervous 20-year-old girl who doesn't know what's going on, I do want to say she spoke Italian better than, her supporters let on. It's not that she's like completely not understanding the language or anything, but okay, she's certainly dealing with a foreign country's police. I empathize with that portion of it. I imagine if on one of my foreign trips, I travel a lot. If I got brought in by the police, even if they spoke English, I'd be very scared about that. So I understand that part of it. But the problem is there's too many of them. So let's think about what Amanda lied about here. She lied about the Meredith always keeping her door locked. She also lied about a phone call where she calls her mother and wakes her up at 3 a.m. Seattle time before the body was found. And she was confronted by the phone records from the police, and she denied she made that call. Her mother even. So later on, this gets into the weeds, but later on, as she becomes a suspect, the Italians start eavesdropping on her calls. She has another call with her mother where she denies to her mother making that 3 a.m. call. And her mother's like, no, you woke me up at 3 a.m. So, and she lied about that even in court. She lied about that call, and she had to actually be presented, but with the telephone records before she finally said, okay, I must have made that call, but I don't know what we talked about. And she and Raffaella lied about their alibi. They said that they went to bed that night and didn't wake up until something like 10 the next morning. But Raffaella's computer shows activity at 6-something in the morning, and they turn their phones on at 6-something in the morning. And of course, Amanda is seen going to the cleaning products section of the store at 7:30 in the morning. She lied about that. And staged break-in, of course, is a lie. And
So,
all these things that they don't suggest somebody who's just like responding to the stress of the moment by throwing stuff out there. The one thing where I could actually see her having responded to the stress of the moment is the slander conviction. So, but it's not the way she says it. I mean, the line of thinking I would think that it might have been something like, okay, Raphael's not supporting my alibi. I'm in trouble here. Who can I accuse? Well, I know that Rudy did it, so I'll accuse a black guy. Do I know any black guys? Yeah, I know Patrick. I'll accuse him. Spit that out. That's the type of thing where I could see her actually just like folding under the pressure of the moment. Now, the problem for her there is she gets up at 5 the next morning, waives her right to counsel, and tells the police, I want to make a spontaneous statement, which she was not required to make, and implicates Patrick again. But I think that first statement, and interestingly, the Italian courts, I think, kind of agreed with my sentiment because they threw out the first statement. They convicted her based on the second statement. And I think that's kind of right. I think that it's very possible that first statement was kind of just Amanda spitballing in response to a high pressure situation. But the rest of these lies just look to me like somebody trying to cover up her involvement in either the murder or the cleanup of a murder. That's what they look to me. They look very organized, very conscious, very consistent, and they don't look like somebody just spitballing and throwing out something because they're under pressure.
Let me put a little color to that based on some, again, detractors and the documentary, which is fresh in my mind because I rewatched it before our conversation today. So with regards to the cell phone, so I'm hearing you say that their cell phones were turned off, both of them, and then not turned on until 6 in the morning. At a certain point in the documentary, Amanda says that basically the police are asking her to see her cell phone, and it occurs to her like, yes, perfect, this is going to exonerate me. Presumably, she's assuming that like the cell towers or something would have picked up her location. I'm wondering, I guess, did that happen? Did they look into the location of her cell phone during the time, or were they not able to ping it because it was turned off?
That's the thing. They did. They subpoenaed. There are extensive. One of the things I should recommend if people really want to get into the weeds in this, there's a specific website. There's a lot of websites dedicated to this case, but there's one that's really neutral and down the line. It's not a pro-Amanda site. It's also not a anti-Amanda site. It's just all the records translated. It's called The Murder of Meredith Kircher. If you go to that site, one of the things you'll see is they did extensive subpoenas of the telecom companies in Italy. And yes, that's how they discovered she turned off her phone and Raffaella turned off his phone is through that. And because of that, they couldn't track her whereabouts or his whereabouts at the time of the murder.
So it's interesting to me that at least in reflecting on this story, because again, the documentary is recorded nearly a decade after the murder, but in reflecting on this story, she thinks like, oh yes, my cell phone records would have exonerated me. And then with regards to her throwing her boss, Philip, under the bus, her argument and the way that it's portrayed in the documentary is that when the police got a hold of her phone, they went in and saw the text with her boss from the night before, where he basically tells her, you don't need to come into the bar tonight. She was bartending at the bar that he owned or that he managed. He says, you don't need to come in tonight. And she says, awesome, like, sounds good. See you later. And according to her, the police interpreted that the Italian that she typed to him to mean like, I will see you later tonight. They said this was you making a plan to meet him at a specific time. This was not like just a saying, right? And so she claims that is where the idea of Philip being guilty was implanted basically into her memory from the police insisting to her that she had made a plan with him that night. So she says like all of a sudden, kind of the walls are caving in on her and she's having these flashes of memory of Meredith screaming the one scream that you talked about that she claims, and then seeing like Philip in a brown suit or something like this, and like a few just like sparks of memory. Now, and there's something that if, like, when you're just listening to something in a narrativized way, that kind of makes sense. Like, they primed her to think of Philip, right? And then later that day or something, she has this epiphany that Philip was the guilty party. What's also interesting to me is the potential of this being a way to put them off onto somebody else, right? Name somebody else if she's trying to remove herself and her boyfriend as suspects. And also, you make an interesting part. And I'm someone who I'm very, I cringe at like racism and even sexism accusations generally. Maybe too much. Maybe I've overcompensated in that way. But it is compelling to me that, well, maybe if she was there and she did know what happened, and it was a black man, Rudy Guede is a black man, maybe you implicate a black man. And again, not just
Would
because
you
a black man
implicate a
are evil.
black man? Would you implicate a black man? Think
Because if
about
someone saw a black man leaving the home,
there might be a
yeah,
witness out there who says, I saw a
right,
black guy running from that cottage.
right,
Of course you implicate a black guy.
right.
Of
That's
course.
If you know who was there.
yeah, I don't emphasize your audience. That's like a gigantic piece of evidence pointing to Amanda's guilt. It's not. I think the fact that she falsely accused somebody of murder, anybody, is a fact that points to her guilt, because I think despite all her claims that she makes about this, the most likely motivation of it is to distract from her investigation of her. And she let him rot in jail for 2 weeks. She actually told other people in her life, Patrick's in jail because of me. She didn't tell the police, hey, let him out, I lied to you. So he spent 2 weeks in jail. He hates her now. He absolutely hates her.
I mean, that makes sense. If you're falsely accused of killing someone, that would be something that would sour you against the individual. That's absolutely true. I guess perhaps unrelated to this line. So Tali, if you want to finish this line, we can. You can, but I have a question after. So go ahead, Tali.
Well, I guess, just it's sort of deviates from this line, Wick, but since I'm speaking, I'll just finish my thought,
Okay.
and then we can turn it over to you. But so the case, ostensibly, from what I gather, was overturned because of these special witnesses that they brought in, forensic analysts, Italian, forensic doctors, basically, who said that there was a high likelihood of contamination, in particular with regards to the bra clasp and the knife. I'm wondering, why did the other evidence not carry enough weight, or like where was it sort of left on the table? And the things that I'm concerned about are the shoe prints, the bloody imprints that match the shoe sizes of Raphael and Amanda, and the staged break-in. It feels like the staged break-in doesn't get addressed in her guilt or innocence, or rather only in her guilt, I guess. And so, yeah, what happened? What was the like weight and evidence given to all of these things that their case was overturned?
Oh, on the stage break-in specifically, the court basically, it does discuss the evidence of the stage break-in, but basically says, given the other evidence, we're not going to give it much weight. I don't think it's the most persuasive part of the opinion. I can tell, I am an appellate lawyer. I'm not an Italian appellate lawyer, but I read plenty of appellate cases here in the United States. And, honestly, sometimes when there's something that a result the appellate court wants to reach, and I'm not like saying this in a nasty way, but like their overall thinking about the case is, okay, there's not enough evidence to affirm her conviction. They will sometimes, and the appellate court will sometimes like just punt on a small issue like that. They won't really make a persuasive argument, and this happens in American courts, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's the explanation for what they did on the stage break-in. I will say this: if you'll notice, even with all my consideration of the DNA evidence, I come down with the conclusion that there's possibly reasonable doubt as to Amanda's guilt. I don't think there's reasonable doubt as to Rafaela's. But there might the evidence. You have to construe a bunch of things in Amanda's direction that are kind of leaps, but you can get to reasonable doubt. You can get to a position where Amanda doesn't commit the murder. Her boyfriend commits the murder. She finds out about it and makes a naive, I'm in love 20-year-old girl's decision to help him try and get away with it. And that's consistent with most of the evidence in the case. You have to explain some things. You have to explain, okay, so why did she bleed at the crime scene? Maybe she had a pre-existing cut or something like that. Why were the cell phones off? Maybe Rafaela premeditated the murder and convinced her to turn her cell phone off too, as a sort of cover story. You have to explain a bunch of things like that, but it's not impossible to do. And given it's not impossible to do that with the DNA evidence, it seems to me it's also not impossible to do that after throwing out the DNA evidence too. So you can argue it as a reasonable doubt case. The big problem with Amanda Knox is precisely that her career in the United States. And this is where I have to put my cards on the table. I think this is kind of gross. Meredith Kircher is dead. Her family is grieving. She knows much more than she's telling about what happened in this case. So she no longer has double jeopardy.
What makes you confident of that?
She knows
what makes you so confident to state? So what makes you so confident that she knows more than she is letting on? Because that's something again we're times
Oh no.
You're more careful, but you seem very confident in that assertion.
She was at the scene. She left her blood drops there. She was at the scene. She knew that Meredith's body was behind that door, which is why she lied to the police about it. She was at the scene. She did the cleanup. Of course she did the cleanup. She bought the cleaning supplies at 7:30 in the morning. She came to the place. She cleaned it up. She knows a heck of a lot about what happened here. Even if she also knows whatever Rafaela told her that caused her to do the cleanup. She knows a lot about what happened. And there's a grieving family in Britain who is watching her get rich off this murder. And there is no other way of expressing that but that. She is doing podcasts. She has now written 2 books. How many people get both a Netflix special and a Hulu special? She's making bank off this. She has become a minor celebrity off of this. And she is spouting this narrative that is absolute BS. And meanwhile, there's a family in Britain who lost their daughter. And she doesn't give a crap about them. And one of the most narcissistic things in this whole story is she keeps on telling the media, oh, I want to meet the Kirchers. I want to make things right with the Kirchers. The reason why the Kirchers don't want to talk to Amanda Knox is because they know they're going to get a load of BS from her. And they know that she knows a lot about, they lived through this trial. They know what the actual evidence is. They know she was at the crime scene. And they know she knows a lot about what happened that they're not telling her, which is why they won't forgive her. And this is sick, okay? That's the part of this that is so sick, that you have a person basically making a career out of, I'm the innocent martyr of the Italian justice system that tried me based on no evidence. That's what they always say. There was no evidence against her. And it's a whole load of crap. And what the actual truth is that she knows a lot about what happened in this case. Honestly, she could tell the Kirchers with no legal liability at all. The problem is it would kill her podcast career. It would kill her book writing career. It would kill her Netflix and Hulu career, because once people learned that she was lying about all this, they would drop her like a hot potato, which is why she's never going to do it.
Okay, just a question for you, a little bit of housekeeping questions and not related to the case. But for the last 30 minutes, would you mind if we took call-ins? Because there's a lot of people in the audience who have questions for you. Would that be something you'd be amenable to? If not,
Go
it's
ahead.
cool. It's up to you.
Go ahead.
Okay. Tali, continue, please.
Cool. Yeah, so essentially your confidence that Amanda knows more than she's letting on is because of what you see as the preponderance of biological data, of DNA evidence, putting her at the scene of the crime.
And the lies, and the failed alibi,
And the lies.
and the framing of Patrick, and the stage break-in. That all points to she was at the scene, and she cleaned up. And we have to engage in some real gymnastics, which I'm willing to give her the benefit out on. I should put my politics on the table. I'm very sympathetic to criminal defendants. I don't like the idea of convicting anybody on anything less than beyond a reasonable doubt. So I'm willing to give her those reasonable doubts and say maybe she didn't do it. But, honestly, if we were just on a strict preponderance standard, I'd say it's more likely than not she participated in the murder. But okay, even if she didn't participate in the murder, she still knows. I'm certain she was at the crime scene. There's no way on this evidentiary record she wasn't at the crime scene and she didn't clean up.
So, given your thoughts on the matter and your opinion here on the case, and given the fact that I doubt you would want her retried. I mean, the conviction was overturned. I don't see any kind of way that I don't know the Italian justice system, but once you're found not guilty, I don't think you can be tried again. So what does justice
They have
look?
a section that would allow retrials.
Oh,
This Court of Cassation specifically found that she couldn't be retried. They invoked a different section of the criminal code.
Oh.
So she can't be retried for murder.
Okay.
And again, that's perfectly fine. She was found not guilty
So
beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah. So what? And my question in this case then is, in your opinion, what does justice look like, or is justice just forever denied us in this? Like, what does justice look like for Meredith Kersher?
At this point, I think there's only two things that I'd see as somewhat in the direction of justice. First of all, this is something Amanda's people will never tell about. She still owes a judgment to Patrick Lumumba. She's getting rich, and she owes money to Patrick Lumumba because Patrick Lumumba sued her got restitution for slander. She's never paid that judgment. She just pay it.
Huh.
She wants to maintain the lie that she didn't mean to slander. No, you put this guy in jail for 14 days. You admit you admitted at the time you put this guy in jail for 14 days. He didn't have anything to do with the murder. Pay the damn judgment. That's number one. That's a simple.
That's very.
Oh, you're roboting out, Tali. We can't hear what you're saying.
Oops.
Yeah.
Am I back?
I think so. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I was just saying that's very surprising to me that she hasn't paid that judgment, especially given her later work with the Innocence Project in the United States and like the emphasis that she has placed in her life of like helping other innocent victims. And I mean, Philip is inarguably an innocent man who was framed for this crime. And so even if she feels like that wasn't her intent, it seems like it would still be like totally in line with her public narrative to pay that, especially like you're saying, in light of the fact that she has made so much money, even if she's totally innocent and she made this money, and this is just the silver lining to the awful circumstances of her framing and stuff like this. She has a lot of money, so it is very shocking.
She caused the incarceration of Patrick Lumumba. I mean, that's kind of important here. She caused his incarceration.
Yeah,
and she did it twice. She didn't just make the one statement, which may have been under some sort of pressure from the police, but then she made a voluntary statement the next day. And then she told people Patrick's in jail because of me. I mean, there's just no argument for not paying this. She hasn't paid it because she can't be forced to pay it because she's not in Italy. She doesn't live in Ily, so they can't attach her garnish her wages or anything like that. But like if this had happened in the United States and she did this, they would garnish her wages. You just have to pay it, and she could pay it.
Yeah.
That's the easiest. That is given the amount of money she's making, that is just like the low-hanging fruit for Amanda Knox. The second thing is, and this is as I said, this is the one I'm never going to convince anybody of this, but you know, I think that given that she can never be tried for this again, and she's writing books about it, she's giving media appearances about it, she's being interviewed right and left. If this is going to be private, it's fine if it's private. I'm not saying she doesn't owe this explanation to me. She does owe it to the Kirchers. I think, and I know she'll never do it, but I hope that someday her conscience will get to her and she will go to the Kircher family. And, you know, if she has to sit down in a confidential meeting with lawyers present or something like that, fine. But, you know, that she will sit down to them and say, here's the truth. And just tell them exactly what the hell happened to their daughter. Or at least everything if she was only involved in the cleanup, at least everything Rafaela told her and everything she saw when she was cleaning it up. But she owes them that. She'll never do it. But, you know, that would be a step towards justice in this case.
Yeah, I can see 1,000 reasons why she would never do that, even if she was mostly innocent, right? There's just nothing for her to be gained and so much potential risk for her. Yeah, I don't know if that's a thing that I could.
But it's not legal risk. That's the key. It's not legal risk.
Yeah, but you have to understand.
Risk to her career.
Not just her career, but if she told
reputational, reputational risk,
and people will like
reputational risk, but not, you know, he some really bad things in Italy. I don't feel that much for Amanda Knox's reputation. I don't think that's the most important thing here. Indeed, that gets to another thing about Amanda Knox that bothers me, which is that he always talks about this case as if she's the most important thing here. You know, like there was a joke on Twitter about studying abroad, and she goes, well, let me tell you about my studying abroad experience. It's like, your roommate was murdered. You know, your studying abroad experience. I understand it's horrible that you feel you spent this time in prison for a slander conviction that you did commit, but okay, you know, you think it's unjust, whatever. Your roommate was murdered. You know, it's not. Don't joke about this. This is not a laughing matter. Your roommate was murdered, and there are people who are still in pain over this. And I don't think she empathizes with those people. I think she only empathizes with herself. So, you know, Amanda Knox's reputation. Who cares about Amanda Knox's reputation? The Kirchers are more important than that.
Yeah, but that's hold on. That's a big ask, right? Especially if you have.
I know it is.
If you have spent a long time going through all these trials, being accused, let's, for the moment, entertain her innocence, right? Just to kind of get in her mindset.
Well, what do you mean by her innocence? That she didn't do anything? That
the accusations that were levied against her by the police are false.
That she wasn't there, basically.
She wasn't at the scene. Okay. Wasn't at the scene. Just for the sake of getting into her mindset. Because if that's the case, and then she goes through trial after trial where she is the subject of inquiry, of slander, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, by the mainstream media, calling, like, slut-shaming her, all these things, I don't know if it's unreasonable to center yourself and your experience in that and to want to tell your story and maybe even make a buck or two off of that experience. I don't know if that's entirely unreasonable. Does that make sense?
Well, here's the problem. The problem with it is that you'd have to change all the facts of the case to get you there. If somebody, first of all, somebody who was innocent, this is actually a really important point. Remember I mentioned that all these courts have 300-page opinions? Someone who is actually innocent would not have been convicted by an Italian court in this way. You'd have to have a different type of set of facts. You have to have a set of facts where there was like no DNA evidence at all, and maybe there was a mistaken identity, or there was, a jailhouse snitch who fingered the wrong guy, or somebody set up a fall guy. All the ways. These are the ways. I mentioned this in my thread, by the way, on Twitter. These are the ways that innocent people get convicted. The innocent people do get convicted. It's not all the time. It's overstated somewhat how much it happens, but it happens frequently. And it happens because of some combination of sketchy witness testimony, motivated witnesses, prosecutors who exclude, the possibility of innocence from their calculation, and bad defense lawyers, public defenders who are I shouldn't say bad, but they're like overworked, underfunded. They don't have enough time to investigate the case. And a combination where you get innocent people convicted. And a lot of these people who are convicted are people who have long rap sheets. They're often people of color. They're often poor, and nobody cares about them, and nobody advocates for them. And they get thrown in prison, and they're innocent. That's how innocent people get convicted. But when you have a defendant who has a skilled defense team of several lawyers, so essentially a rich person's defense, and they get convicted, and they get convicted with an opinion that's 350 pages long, discussing the evidence against them. They're not. That is not a situation where the person is likely to be able to say, "Well, you just got the wrong guy." That's not that case. Now, what you can have is a situation where somebody like that was convicted where the evidence wasn't beyond a reasonable doubt. And as I said, I'm willing to totally accept that Amanda Knox is in that category. But you're not going to get this like got the wrong guy situation. When you have 5 defense lawyers and they have 350 pages of evidence against you, it's not a case of mistaken identity. It's at best a case of reasonable doubt, and often it's just you're guilty. and people have to understand this. I think part of the meta story about Amanda Knox is that Amanda Knox is the type of person that Americans want to be innocent.
What do you mean by that?
What wealthy Americans do. She's white. She's well off. She's well spoken. She doesn't have a long rap sheet. She's not a career criminal. She was caught up in the foreign justice system, speaking a foreign language, and she doesn't seem like, and this is part of what people argue to me, she doesn't seem like the type of person who would commit murder. And thus, he's the perfect person for a lot of people's innocence narrative. She's what people want an innocent defendant to look like and be like. And in truth, your average innocent defendant is probably a person of color, or with a rap sheet, maybe a gang member, maybe committed a lot of other crimes other than the one he's been accused of, male, young, split up parents, with a single public defender, overworked public defender defending him, and a lot of hoodlum friends. That's your average. That's the type of person who actually gets convicted as an innocent person all the time. And people, that narrative doesn't appeal to people. That's not somebody they can empathize with or identify with. Yeah, they'll be, if you present the case to them, they'll say, sure, yeah, absolutely. If I was on that jury, I would acquit him. It's not absolutely, you should not be convicted for something you didn't do, even if you're not such a great person. They'll say it. But they don't want to attach themselves to that narrative because the person at the center of it is not appealing. Amanda Knox's narrative appeals to people because of who she is. And that's a key part of this, and why this case took off the way it did as sort of the symbol of innocence narrative.
Yeah, this is a bit of a meta question. Forgive me for it, but I am curious. Why do you think that so many people do kind of get into this, for lack of a better term, true crime drama and get so attached? Because this is something that I've noticed lately, is so many people have such strong opinions on cases that they don't involve them at all. So do you have any thoughts on why people get so involved with cases like this? What do you think?
I can tell you why true crime appeals to me. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I'm a little different. And because I'm a lawyer, even though I'm a civil litigator, the legal aspects are actually particularly interesting to me. Like, I like talking about the evidence, not just the Amanda Knox case and many of these cases. I like things like cross-examination of witnesses and things like that are very lawyer, and briefing, things that are very lawyer intensive. But what also appeals to me is you have a puzzle. And one of my favorite little anecdotes is that, I don't know if this is still true, I haven't been in many years, but I remember I'm a civil litigator, so I don't go there that often. But the LA District Attorney's Office, which I have been to, in the Clara Shortridge Foltz building in downtown Los Angeles, was decorated with jigsaw puzzles. And you know, that's why are there jigsaw puzzles all over the district attorney's office? Because every case is a puzzle, and the prosecutors' goal is often to put the pieces of the puzzle together, the jury, and it's a powerful metaphor about what prosecutors are supposed to do and what they're supposed to be about.
No, it makes sense.
And these cases are puzzles. They're not only puzzles, by the way, about ultimate guilt. That's an interesting thing about them. They're also puzzles about motives. And that interests people. Indeed, you know, a lot of people respond to me by saying, what's Amanda Knox's motive here? You know, if she murdered Meredith Kircher, I don't know her motive. You often don't know the motive. But I don't know her motive. If she cleaned up, I know her motive. You know, then she's in love and with Rafaela, and it's a bad 20-year-old girl's decision to help him cover this up. But if she was in on the murder, I don't know her motive. But even if you take the narrative of Amanda Knox, we have huge puzzle questions then. Like, for instance, how did Rudy Goudet do all this stuff? You know, that's an interesting puzzle too. You know, how did he know? Here's a good puzzle question, and I'm not trying to make bang everyone's head overhead the idea that Amanda's guilty or anything with this question, but just an interesting question to ask yourself about Rudy, if you think Rudy is the sole murderer. How did Rudy know that there was only one person in the village that day? 4 people lived there.
I don't know. Have you
How does he know that? You know, now if Amanda and Rafael are in it, it's pretty easy to know how he knows that.
Sure.
But if it was him alone, how does he know that? How does he know he will find Meredith alone in the cottage? My point in this discourse is that's what gets people about true crime. I think that's what gets me about true crime. That there's not just the puzzle about guilt or innocence. Sometimes you know the defendant is guilty. OJ was guilty of sin. Jodi Arias is guilty of sin. But there are still puzzles. Even when you know the defendant is guilty, there are still puzzles about people's motives, about what they actually did, about why witnesses said the things they did. You know, we talked earlier about the motivation of Amanda Knox when she told lies, but you know, that's a puzzle to be solved too. And it's interesting to get in people's heads and try and solve these puzzles. And I think that's one of the reasons why the genre is so rewarding to people.
Have you tried to reach out to Amanda Knox or any of the people involved to kind of get thoughts from them on this and thoughts about some of your opinions on the case, or tried to talk or contacted them at all, actually?
Amanda knows who I am. She has commented on people commenting on my threads. I think she commented on one of my threads directly, too.
Tali,
Once
did you
upon
try
a
to get
time.
Amanda for this? You
I didn't.
You
No.
should have. That
But
would have been
hey,
very
maybe-
cool.
I
Maybe
know.
next week. Maybe next week. I don't know.
That would have been.
My impression is, and Amanda is. First of all, I want to say, like, I'm not a celebrity like Amanda is. She doesn't have to answer to me. I am not one of these arrogant persons who stands outside of, why don't you answer my questions? So she does not have to answer to me. But I can comment more generally in saying it's pretty obvious to me that the media appearances that Amanda does engage in are carefully selected. As far as I know, since she was cross-examined in her case, she has never been taken an interview with someone who is both knowledgeable about her case and the details of it and a hostile interviewer.
See, Amanda, if you listen to this, okay, and you might, there's a non-zero chance, you can prove this guy wrong right now. I'm sure he would love to come back on the show. I'd be a fair moderator, right? And I would make sure that you had a fair chance to answer any accusations or questions. I think it would be great content. But it's up to you, Amanda, if you're listening. Yeah, Tali, maybe DM her, and we can try. We can see. But I guess
I'm totally open to that.
Yeah, I guess just another question that I would have for you, given the fact that it's a probably, you recognize that you might have gotten things wrong. Like, we're human, we do. We get things wrong. Perhaps there's something we've missed, or something we misinterpret, or something that we just don't know that kind of changes everything in the dynamic of the case, and etc. Do you ever worry that making such strong proclamations online about these things, isn't it like a form of slander? Not that I'm accusing of slander. I want to be very clear, right? But don't you worry that you're going to get it wrong and someone's going to get hurt because of that, or someone's reputation is going to be permanently scarred or damaged?
I practice a lot of defamation law, plaintiff side and defendant side. Very familiar with defamation law. These people are public figures. That's important. Indeed, I can tell you.
I'm not talking legally. I'm not talking legally. I'm talking morally, right?
Okay, but like there was a situation that occurred in the O.J. Simpson case with his son Jason Simpson, who some people love to spitball. The O.J. is innocent crowd loves to spitball them. Maybe Jason did it, and they have all these things. Jason Simpson is a private figure, and I absolutely tore people to shreds over doing that, because precisely that if you're a private, it's not just the legal law is different. If you're a private figure, you have the right to not be dragged in before the public and falsely accused of murder. That is absolutely. And the people who do that because they want to have fun with the O.J. Simpson case and say, "Gee, wouldn't it be great if O.J. was actually innocent and all those people were wrong?" So they implicate this living person who had nothing to do with his father's murder and his father's conduct, and also saw his stepmother murdered, and it's like had to live through these events too. He was actually present at the end of the Bronco chase and was very upset. This is not somebody who deserves that sort of treatment. But the flip side of it is, I don't feel that way about Amanda Knox. I think Amanda Knox, even if you totally disagree with me, Amanda Knox has absolutely volunteered for any sort of debate about her case. Now, to be clear, back to the slut-shaming thing, not about her sex life. If you want to talk about, how she was this promiscuous person who had all these boyfriends in Italy or whatever, then, as far as I'm concerned, you're scum. Because that's not put at issue there.
It doesn't have anything to do with guilt or innocence. It's just.
But she's a famous defendant.
And to be fair,
a famous defendant in a famous murder case who specifically, unlike even other murder defendants like Casey Anthony, got acquitted. I think she's given like one interview since then. She's basically disappeared.
Right.
And, and Casey Anthony, I think, even though I think she's guilty, I think there's a strong argument that Casey Anthony's entitled to her privacy at this point. It's not like putting herself out there as the font of innocence or anything. She's just living her life somewhere. But if you do what Amanda has done in this case and really market it as your identity and your branding and make a lot of money off of it, I think you're subject to people saying, I think you did it. Especially since it's not like people are saying, I think you did it out of nowhere. If someone's saying, I think you did it, they have like 355-page Italian opinions that say they think you did it.
No, makes sense. Tali, did you have anything else for?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just agree. Like she, whether you believe she's innocent or not, she has made her career being an innocent person who was framed for a crime that she didn't commit. And she has, like you said, I mean, she wrote 2 books. This is not something that she has attempted to move past. And that alone does not prove her guilt or innocence, but it does make her just total fair game for people to pick apart what she's saying, because she continues to say more and more. She continues to speak about it. That is somewhat noteworthy. Again, I don't want to make too much of that, but especially when you compare it to some of the other, like Casey Anthony, some other high profile accused criminals, and even just the rest of the people involved in this case. Her 2 roommates, Raphael, the Kircher family. None of them are still profiting or publicly litigating this case in the way that Amanda is, and so it just simply is fair game as far as I'm concerned.
I actually think Rafaela is a great comparison here. I never thought of this, but I think what Whick was saying earlier about if she's totally innocent, wouldn't she? Well, Raphael claims he's innocent. He's never said I did it, and yet Rafaela has not pursued a career on this case. He has not written several books. He does not go on, Italian podcasts. Say, he doesn't command big speaking fees. He doesn't, he does none of this stuff. And that suggests something. It suggests one of 2 things. One thing it could suggest is it's more evidence of guilt because, like,
you don't want to. Yeah, you don't want to get trapped, right?
Doesn't want to poke the bear, but it also. If you are a person who believes in Amanda's innocence, this fact actually should give you pause. Because if your theory is she's only doing this because she's an innocent person, so of course she has to shout to the rooftops that she's innocent. No, you don't. Here's this other person who you think is innocent, because all the Amanda defenders think Raphael is innocent too. That's part of their whole conception of the case, and yet he's not shouting to the rooftops.
Well, to be fair,
the other thing is,
no one focuses on him. They all focus on Knox.
Right. And we all focus on Knox. We all focus on Knox because she wants us to focus on Knox, because she has made a career of this, and she absolutely wants Amanda Knox to be the center of the universe on this thing. But also, one other thing about Rafaela. That also, if you take it all the way to the conclusion, might support my speculation that maybe Amanda is innocent but cleaned up. Because now you have one person who is guilty of the whole thing, and he doesn't do any press at all. And the other person who is formally innocent of the thing, but has a lot to hide about her actual involvement. And she doesn't want that to become the story, so she shouts from the rooftop that actually there was no evidence against her at all, and this was just a total concocted case against her. That kind of fits with all that, if you think about it.
Okay. We do have a gentleman with some questions that we're going to pull in real quick. We only got about 10 minutes left, so we're going to try to be concise because we do want to give you a last word, right? And tell people where they can find you, etc. But let's get this gentleman in and see what he has to say. Hello, you're live. Hello, you're live.
Hello.
Oh, there we are. What do you got for
Hello.
us? You said you had some questions. Fire away, sir.
Yes. Hi. So my first question is, what exactly is the evidence that they had turned their cell phones off?
Subpoena from the cell phone companies, and they didn't ping for hours. And I believe, actually, there was specific testimony from someone in the court, in one of the court cases, as to when Rafaela turned it back on, and they were turned back on at like 6 something in the morning.
Okay. My second question is, how exactly did the police determine the break-in was staged? Especially, like, what about the shatter pattern of the glass specifically was suspect?
So it's a lot. There's a lot of combination things that make it unlikely the break-in to be real. First of all, if you just look at the wall there, it's, I guess, not impossible to get up there, but it's a difficult climb. You have to climb off a sloping hill onto a window bar on the first floor, and then up into this shuttered window. You got to figure out a way to reach up to the top of the shutters and get the shutter open. And after getting the shutter open, you got to go back down and find a rock. This was a heavy rock. I don't know exactly how heavy, but it was many pounds, this rock, which you then have to find a place where you can balance and throw it through the window. And then the splatter pattern was such that, as I recall, there's both splatter that was under and over a pile of Philomena's clothes next to the window. So it didn't splatter the way it was you would expect if, in fact, the break-in wasn't staged. And the key point about all of this is the cops got there, and from the very start, they're like not believing. This was their testimony in the case, that they didn't believe the break-in was real from the very start because of these things, before they even knew there was a murder or Amanda was a suspect.
So some of the
No
shattered
Italian court found the break-in was real, by the way. Not even the ones that acquitted
right.
Amanda.
Okay. So some of the shattered glass was found under clothes, and some was found on top of the same clothes. Is that what you're saying?
I believe so. There's a stack of clothes right next to the window, and it's broader than that. There's expert reports on all this, and of course the defense have expert reports too. But it just didn't work that this rock went through the window, thrown from outside, and the glass would splatter in exactly this way. It didn't work. And of course, that was combined with all this other evidence that it was staged, like just the fact that what Rudy would have had to do to get through that window. And by the way, remember also, all of this has to happen. If the break-in was real, all of this has to happen while Meredith is in her room alone and doesn't hear any of this.
Yeah, that's fair. I just wonder if, because I don't know. I'm just the whole thing about the glass shatter pattern kind of throws me off a bit, because just the idea that maybe when climbing through the window, the guy, might have disturbed a pile of clothes and some of the shattered glass. Like, this, to me, this doesn't necessarily suggest that there was a break-in or that the break-in was staged, but like at the same time, I can also, I think, see the argument you're saying that the way that the break-in happened seems quite unlikely.
I think that's actually a great point. And the point is that when you view evidence in isolation in these cases, you can always find, not always, but much of the time, find something wrong with it. I suppose if there's a videotape of the guy committing the murder, you won't. But in many cases, you'll find something wrong with the evidence. That's the jigsaw puzzle metaphor of the DA's office, which is you actually have to then put all the evidence together and say, well, do I really think, all these things happened and, Meredith's in the other room. She doesn't know anything about it.
Okay. Do you have any last thoughts or questions, Mr. KO Dave?
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Throughout this entire discussion has been fascinating to me. I don't usually pay much attention to true crime, but whenever it does come up, it is interesting. But the major question for me that has been just in my mind this entire time, what is Amanda's motive for killing Meredith?
Don't know. That's the problem. I don't know. And thing is, fundamentally, in the United States, certainly, and I think probably in Italy, you don't have to prove motive. You have situations right now where we are discovering DNA evidence of cold cases from 30 years ago, where we literally know nothing. The witnesses are dead. Nobody knows what Joe Smith was doing on the night of January 13th, 1984. There's nobody who can tell you anything about what the motives were. But the DNA matches, and we bring in Joe Smith and we convict him. And that's it's frustrating because we human beings want stories, and we're less convinced when we don't have that. And I get that. But part of my point with all this is that if you have a DNA field in a crime scene and it tells you certain things about who was there, you have to go with that, rather than just say, well, I don't believe this person's capable of it. My father certainly did not believe O.J. Simpson was capable of double murder, and he knew him fairly well.
Okay.
But,
well, thank you.
They are.
Yeah, thank you, KO Dave.
Yep. Thank you for hearing my questions.
No problem. Have a great day, man. Okay. With
Wick,
that,
while you're pulling in, anyone else or no?
no one else is joining backstage. There's a lot of people in chat who are chatting.
I'm on my
right?
phone, so I can't see.
But they can't.
There are a couple things I want to say from chat, and just to get on the point of the break-in, and there are several points I think in a similar vein, where the courts that overturned the convictions of Amanda and Raphael on the basis of potential contamination of several pieces of DNA evidence, those courts did not change their position on things like the break-in. That I think is noteworthy. And again, you don't need to be able to prove motive or intent, but that is noteworthy that these same courts didn't change their position on that. Along the lines of this, someone wrote in chat, and I don't know anything about the veracity of this claim, but I'm curious if you do. Someone said that Amanda Knox had staged burglaries when she was a student at Washington State University as part of like some prank. Do you know anything about this?
Yeah. So I don't get in. This is a classic example where I don't think it's that probative. Like you really, if you stage a burglary as a sorority prank, that means you're going to stage a burglary in a murder case. That's an example of. I try to be fair to Amanda Knox. I think that's kind of an implausible jump. But yes, she did participate in a staged burglary as a college prank. It's interesting. I will say this: like a lot of Amanda's defenders make a big deal of the fact that Rudy had a couple of burglary priors. And it seems to me like if you're going to read a lot into Rudy as the burglar because he had a couple of burglary priors, then it seems to me that the fact that Amanda had a staged burglary prior is just as relevant as that. But I don't think either of those two facts are pretty relevant.
Okay.
Yeah. And
go ahead, please.
Sorry.
We are winding down.
Just a couple more things. Yeah. One person said in chat, like, break-ins are probably common there. My understanding is that the crime rate in this city was extremely low. So much so that they weren't even tracking it numerically, like, leading up to this case. It was a very safe village.
They track, I guess, general crime, but it's unusual. They don't track the homicide rate because it's so low. It's definitely a low crime city. I mean, look, there's Americans there. Is there probably some pickpocketing going on there and things? It wouldn't surprise me, but yeah, very few murders there. And indeed, when you look at the composition of who investigated this and who prosecuted it, there's a lot of people coming in from different regions of Italy, and that's usually an indicator of a low crime rate, a low homicide rate, because if places with high homicide rates have dedicated robbery and homicide divisions of their police departments and dedicated prosecutors who prosecute murders.
Okay. Any other questions,
Okay.
Tali?
And then the last note that I want to make, and this will lead us into Dylan giving your little outro and plugging where people can find you, because you spoke about this in your thread, and I think it's just really important, and I don't know that it really came up in our conversation today, but a lot of the Amanda defenders rest on the claim that Rudy was the sole perpetrator of this crime. But notably, you bring up in several of your threads the courts that overturned the ruling against Amanda and Raphael maintain the high likelihood of there being something like 3 attackers or at least multiple attackers, and that the only 2 legal experts or lawyers who made the claim of a lone attacker were the lawyers of Amanda and Raphael, and their stories didn't match each other. So one was claiming an attack from the front, the other was claiming an attack from behind, where it seems like from the evidence, the parsimonious answer is that there was more than one attacker. If you want to maybe comment on that, or at least direct people where they can find that in threads that you've already written, and then we can kind of wrap up here.
Yeah, so the finding of multiple attackers is in the 2015, March 2015 opinion overturning Amanda's murder conviction from the Court of Cassation in Italy. You can find that at the Murder of Meredith Kircher's website. I cited recently in one of my Twitter threads in the responses the specific section of the opinion where it gets into that, but it says it. And the key point is that courts that find for Amanda nonetheless don't believe Amanda. No, they don't. They reject the multiple attackers thing. There's plenty of evidence of multiple. They reject the single attacker thing. There's plenty of evidence of multiple attackers. The wound pattern shows multiple attackers. It shows that Meredith was held down. Obviously, there's DNA evidence of different people involved in this thing. There is the stage break-in, which would indicate multiple attackers. There's the cleanup, which would indicate multiple attackers, because you have to believe actually when these guys actually said, why maybe Rudy stayed 4 hours there and cleaned up. And it's like, really? This guy who has no idea when anyone's going to come home in a 4-person cottage is going to stay there for hours after a murder cleaning up? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So that's why the court ends up saying there's multiple attackers. But all courts that are exonerating Amanda of murder are nonetheless rejecting a lot of her factual claims. And I think that underscores, and then maybe this is my closing point, that underscores that this is really, even if you think Amanda is, quote, not guilty of murder, this is a reasonable doubt case. It's not, he's completely innocent. There was no evidence that she got railroaded through the Italian legal system. It's a reasonable doubt case. The courts that exonerated her are saying, we don't believe you, Amanda, on many things that are very important to this case, but we don't think there's enough there to convict you of murder. And the problem is that doesn't spin very well for her, so she has to portray it as something other than it is. You can find me at Dylan Esper on Twitter. If you have any problems with what I said, or you want to agree with it, whatever, come to my Twitter page and hash it out with me.
Yeah, check it out. I have a link to it in the YouTube description. So if you go to my YouTube description and you click on that link, you can find his page directly. Dylan, thank you for spending your time with us on the Whick and Tali show, right? And going over this. It has been elucidating. Now, I admit I'm left with more questions than answers, but such is the case with such large cases and things like that. I would love to, if we get Amanda Knox, would you come in and talk to her with us?
I'd love to talk to Amanda Knox.
Okay.
I'm a lawyer. I take depositions.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I
I
long shot.
prepare.
It's like a moonshot here, but who knows? We've
I
had bigger
prepare.
people on.
So,
So.
yeah. And to be clear, like again, I don't want to make this about me. She doesn't have to answer to me. I'm not in her order.
But she has to answer to me. Okay, no, I'm kidding.
But I'd like it if, like, she gave an interview with Dan Abrams, for instance,
Fair enough.
or Greta Van Susteren, or some other person in the media who's a lawyer and who has cross-examined witnesses before and who would prepare for the interview. I think that would actually be a great thing for her to do, and I have my doubts as to whether she'll ever do something like
Fair
that.
enough. Well, thank you again, and we're gonna let you go. Okay, see you later, Dylan. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dylan.
Oh, he was a nice guy. He's very yappy, very talkative,
yeah.
but that's a good thing. Okay, we liked that he was able to kind of explain his points. He seemed to have a good command of the facts. There's a lot of people in chat who disagree with the facts. I encouraged them to come up, but they did not, and that's unfortunate. Yeah, it's something that
many such cases.
Yes, many such cases indeed. You know what I've learned today, Tali?
What have you learned?
Not to trust women. Okay, they're just gonna lie to you. They're just they're just a problem. Okay.
True.
It's gotta be it's gonna be an issue going forward, and so we need to deal with women at some point. I don't know how. I don't know the answer to the woman question, but we have to find one, or else, like, I don't want to get stabbed. I don't want to get murdered.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm glad you have the correct takeaway from this conversation. Never trust women. Yeah.
True. But I think that it's one of those things where people get very emotional about these cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they get very convinced of, wow, that guy's innocent. And when people are convinced that there's a injustice, that there is a wrong that has been committed, it can make people very solidified in their belief systems. But that said, I fully admit I am just not familiar with this case as much as you are, or near as much as everyone else seems to be. I think I told you, I was like, man, I don't know if I care if this white woman killed someone or not. I just don't.
This lady.
Yeah, this was back when I was in my 20s, okay? And I remember seeing it on the news, but at the time I was like, oh wow, that sucks, and moving on with my life. But I think it is good to kind of branch out in our interests and have people on we normally wouldn't talk to, and get a different kind of style of take. Dear audience, did you like this guest? Did you like this topic? Did you like this this conversation? Was it good? Was it bad? Was it neutral, boring, fun, interesting, exciting? Let us know in the comments of the YouTube, right? Let us know in the chat. All these things really help us and figure out what to do. What do you think, Tali? What are your thoughts here?
Well, I do hope that everyone liked it, because it's funny. I'm really not a true crime groupie in any way. I don't listen to true crime podcasts and stuff, but I'm very intrigued and allured by the different Netflix documentaries that come out and stuff like this. And I think we all have this kind of human itch for justice in whatever direction that points you in all of these various cases. But I hope people liked it, because Dylan also has some interesting and controversial takes on the Menendez brothers trial and stuff like this. So if people are interested, I think it would be cool to have him back and talk about some of these other things. But yeah, I find Dylan pretty compelling, especially because, maybe with some exceptions, I don't think he's very emotional in his analysis of the case, and he's not trying to claim that she definitely did it. He's not trying to impugn a motive to her. He's skeptical of a lot of those narratives as well.
Oh no!
I think people really do have a very emotional reaction.
Can I also say the tech issues for this stream have been very frustrating? Okay, I know it's not your fault.
I know.
It's just
sorry.
what is going on? Sad.
Yeah, my laptop just refused to connect my camera at a certain point, so eventually I switched onto my phone, which at least hopefully made it a little better so that you could all look at
Well,
my
this is why
beautiful
half
face.
of our
But
viewers tune in, okay, to see you, okay? But you know, I don't have that same draw at least.
yeah,
So
you should just take your shirt off whenever my
I
camera goes out.
not for free. Shit, they gotta pay me. Okay, this is how we do
Fair.
this. Okay, you gotta make money. Speaking of money, if you guys want more of this kind of content, you gotta pay us for it. Okay, so send in those super chats, throw some gift subs, throw some bits. Anything helps. It really is. It's a new month, and we've been doing good. We've been doing real good for this whole year. Actually, I want to keep it up. So keep sending me your money.
Keep it up.
Keep sending me your money.
Keep sending Wick your money.
Yeah, we got content coming up today. So I'm going to end the stream, right? I got to finish eating and a few other things. But at 9 o'clock, I will be back on to talk with Riley, RGR, Riley Grace Rochong, and a few other people, including Destiny, including Soy Pill, including just a whole host of people about the chorus scandal, the dark money, ooh, scary, that's Taylor Lorenz exposed, quote unquote. And we will be having a discussion about that. I will not be leading the discussion. It is not my panel. I did not choose the guests. Don't yell at me, okay? But I was offered a place on it, and I wanna get my opinions out before I host my own discussion on this, and I moderate the discussion on Thursday. But yeah, what about you, Tali? What's going on in your life?
Well, I'm looking forward to this panel tonight. I wish I could have been a part of it, but alas, I'm not important enough just yet. But maybe one day I will be. Wick, question: are you going to be streaming it on
Yeah, I'm gonna
Wick
try.
TV?
I'm assuming
'Cause
I'm allowed. I'll
definitely
ask.
going to be tuning in.
Huh? Say one more
Okay.
time.
Right. If not, I'll have to find
Yeah, I don't
this Riley person.
know. I don't know the rules. I'm gonna ask, and if she says no, she says no, and that's fine. I still want to be part of the conversation, right? Here's the thing about dark money, and
Yeah.
all those super chats you guys sent, that's technically dark money. Okay, so the problem with dark money, or the so-called problem with dark money, is people will say, well, you can't track it. You don't know who's actually given the funds. And you may think, well, Wick, doesn't their name come up on the super chat? And don't we know, and isn't linked to an account? And that's fair enough. But we technically know who is paying the chorus members. It's chorus. The question is one of degrees of separation. The accusation against chorus isn't that chorus is dark money, but the people who are funneling money into the group that pays chorus, the 1630 group, is dark money because some of those donations are anonymous. Okay? So the accusation is that anonymous donors give money to 1630, which gives money to a host of different projects, including chorus, and then chorus gives that money to streamers. The accusation is that this is a problem because how do we know they're not paying to change and to influence the creators' ideas? Shouldn't we know who's giving this money? And I would just point you to super chats have the same problem of untraceable, untrackable, not because we can't track who's super chatting, but I don't know who Audacity works for example. I don't know who pays Mr. Wise Guys. Why? I have no way of knowing, right? I could ask them, but they're not. They're not obligated to tell me.
Your whole
anything.
who super chats the super chatters thing is very funny, and it's an illustrative point. I think. I'm with you. I think this whole Destiny's made, I think, a really compelling case that dark money is essentially the same thing as lobbying, and so he talks a lot about the people who make all the APAC accusations, right? And the Democrats are owned by APAC, and APAC is influencing, getting people to change their positions. And the argument for people like Destiny and myself, and I think illogical argument is in these cases, these lobbying groups are giving money to people who they agree with or who they believe agrees with them. And I think it's like the same thing with the PV quote unquote scandal. It's like, okay, so were all of these already liberal and progressive streamers, did they change their content and their worldview because they were being paid by PV? Or did PV give them money because they were people who were aligned with the message that PV wanted to promote? It's like there's a point in Taylor Lorentz's article where she's like, these big four donors of the 1630 project, like they have been linked to these other like fundraising initiatives, and it was something like pro-choice. I don't remember what the exact things were, but basically they were all these like left-wing
Oh
causes,
my
and
God.
she says like they've been linked with this and that, but no one knows what their motivations are. Well, their motivations are what they're putting their money behind. Like that is the clearest. Since we can't, along the lines of the Amanda Knox thing, since we can't actually get into the brains of people and know exactly what they believe, we can go based on what they put what they invest into, right? What they put their time and money into. And it's like Pisco was making this argument of like, okay, well, if I was being paid by some incubator program from the Daily Wire, like, wouldn't you guys want me to reveal that? And it's like, well, sure, but actually the Daily Wire would have a lot more to
Answer
answer
for.
for if they were
Yeah.
paying Pisco. Yeah, because it's like, right, it's like if these people, if they spend their hard-earned money backing liberal and progressive content creators,
Look,
they probably believe in liberal and progressive causes. It's not
yeah.
that crazy. It's not
Here
that hard to understand.
here's the
Yeah,
here's the thing. Like, look, I'm with you. If you can point to a change in someone's content and tie it, or at least make it a compelling case that the money they've received from an organization, dark or not, okay, whether they disclose it or not, has changed their message
right.
on a topic. So, for example, if Pisco, if I found out he was getting money from the Daily Wire and nothing else had changed about him, I'd be like, why is the Daily Wire paying you? But I'd be like, more on the cases, what are they thinking? Are they dumb? You're against a lot of what they say. But if suddenly he was,
But also, if anything,
just
I
real
would
quick,
assume. Yeah,
yeah, just real quick.
go ahead.
But suddenly, if one day he was like, actually, you know what, guys, I think Trump is pretty based and we should all vote for Trump now. And then I found out that the Daily Wire was paying him, then you have a compelling case because you could demonstrate a content change. And I'd be like,
Right.
oh shit, right? Like that's obviously why, right? In the same way, this is also if it was foreign money that was not disclosed. So if I found out that someone was getting a bunch of money from Russia and they were trying to hide it, that would be an issue for me because it's foreign funding they were trying to hide. In the Chorus incident, no evidence that they're trying to hide it, no evidence that there's foreign funding, no evidence that there was any kind of content manipulation or content changed by the creators. It's just a bunch of suppositions like, isn't it weird? Isn't it strange? Couldn't it be? Like a lot of suppositions to make you think and imagine the worst, but no actual evidence. And that's a problem for me.
Yeah, old Scotty said in the chat they got their panties in a wad because none of the money went to the far lefties, and I think that's just exactly what this meltdown is about.
That's the worst
it's
part
just-
of it, that they didn't pay me,
Taylor Lorenz-
okay?
Yeah, true. Well, Taylor Lorenz is like Hassan in her dripping contempt for liberals. I mean, it's just all over. The way that the article was written, you would think that it was written by some conservative group. Because again, it's like the whole title, it's like the dark money liberals. Like that's not even an association that people commonly make. Like that's not even like a trope. And like that doesn't mean that liberals are immune to these type of financial incentives and stuff. But she hates that it's mainstream centrist, moderate, normal left-wing Democrats who are getting this type of funding and attention, and not the people like her who are accelerationists and extremists and like totally anti the Democratic Party.
Here's my
And I think too,
go ahead.
I just think like, well, just even with the Daily Wire thing, like if I found if Pisco became a regular, semi-regular guest, whatever, on like the Ben Shapiro show or something, right? They're both like trained lawyers and stuff like this. And it turned out that Pisco was getting paid. I would assume that the Daily Wire was doing what all other mainstream left and right wing media does, which is paying to have someone with different opinions on to give a variety of perspectives to your audience. Now, I don't think that when Fox News hires liberals or when MSNBC or CNN hire and pay conservatives to come on, I don't think that they are under the illusion that they're going to be changing these people's minds. Do some of these people's minds change? Probably in a natural way. Like I'm sure, Kennedy and some of these like people who work with Fox News, these people become your friends. You might become more sympathetic to them, less inclined to like view their worldview as evil and instead see it as more complicated and maybe misguided or whatever. But I have no reason to believe that because someone gets paid, even by like an adversarial company, group, movement, that means that they are being paid to change. It's a really pessimistic view of human nature. And like I'm someone that does like to draw attention to incentive structures because I think that we should be aware of these things. But
Yeah.
I don't know that it's obvious at all that if someone comes into funding, comes into some money, that they're going to change all of their beliefs. Like it feels like a projection rather than
Well, let's
a
just be
journalistic
honest
endeavor.
about what's happening, okay? These people aren't making these people aren't making their attacks in earnest. And what I mean by that is that they don't really believe that anything's actually wrong here. They're simply using supposition and people's imaginations and playing on that because they do not like liberals. They do not. And they do not like someone.
Yeah.
And they will attack them through this kind of vector because the transparency only goes one way. The ask for transparency is going to be infinite on your side because I went through this with the Progressive Victory thing, right? They will always, let's see your bank statements. Let's see this. Let's see that. Let's see the other thing. I want to see the checks. I had this guy DMing me to say, show me the checks that you received so we can track it and things like that. But if you suggest that they should show you their financials, they're like, well, why? I'm not going to do that. That's weird. Yeah, it's weird, motherfucker. Why are you doing it to me?
Yeah.
Right? What is going on? Again, the same challenge during Progressive Victory I'll make to anyone. And to be clear, I'm not involved with Chorus at all. I did not know they existed until very recently. Okay. If you can show me,
They only came into existence very recently.
yeah, but
which is
just real
another
quick before
sort of,
I forget.
I think, like nefarious angle of this article.
Yeah, but
Sorry.
before I forget, if you can show me that the contract stipulates that they can't talk about X, Y, or Z, or they have to talk about X, Y, or Z in a certain way, then you have a point. That's a problem, okay? If you can show me that the funding that they're getting comes from a foreign nation or a foreign group, like China or Russia or something, then we have a problem. And lastly, if you can show me that they hid this from people, like actively hid the fact that they were getting paid or told the people who were under them to hide the fact that they're getting paid in some sort of contract or some written statement or some audio call, leaked audio, something like that, right? Then we can have a discussion. But I haven't seen any of that. Not a damn thing, okay? And it's just a lot of people, frankly, making shit up. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about it more in about 30 minutes. A little over 30 minutes. We're going to end the stream now, though. Tali, do you have any last words?
No. Read it off here. And do so for attorney.
Deebu gabu gaka.
Probably guilty, at least without the.
It's just robots. It's just robots.
Am I cutting out again?
Yep. Robots.
God damn it.
Robots.
You back now?
It's a remix, gang. I guess we'll find out, and you're frozen too on your camera. It's a very flattering pose. But I'll talk to you guys later, and I will see you in about 30 minutes. Bye.